Welcome back. This is the belly again. Now, in my first two videos, I described how to set up your data points and set up your ballistic solver to make sure that you get pretty close from the get-go, and talked about all the variables to consider. In the second video, I talked about how to ensure that you're at 100 meters, again based on the reticle, a mill-based reticle, and our fake subtensions. But you can figure all the subtensions for your scope out from your optics manufacturer to make sure that we are getting a good zero distance. So now that we've got our data set up, we've got our zero set up, and you've made your adjustments, you've achieved a good zero. The next part is to make sure that what we see farther downrange is actually what we can. It's called truing the curve. Basically, it's making sure that what we've got going on downrange matches what the ballistic solver tells us, and then manipulating those variables until we get something that's that's a lot closer. The key way that I do this is through muzzle velocity. Again, simply because your manufacturer may say, hey, out of our test barrel, it's coming out 2,600 feet per second. Now, I don't know what kind of crony they used. I don't know what sort of testing measures they use. Most of the modern ammunition manufacturers are pretty good about this, and they can get you close enough to where you're not, all over the place. If your barrel's a little bit longer, you may get more velocity. If it's shorter, you may get less velocity. Here's the way we can tell. So what we got is, at our 100-yard zero, our muzzle velocity hasn't slowed down enough between what we believe to be happening and our original data put into our ballistic solver and what's really happening. Again, the bullet will tell us whether it's going faster or slower in practice, what's happening with that ammunition at that time with your rifle. So as we look out to 300, maybe our ballistic solver tells us that we should have a holdover of 0.3 mils, but then when we shoot, we actually observe a 0.7 mils. What that tells us is that the ammunition has a lower muzzle velocity than what the manufacturer suggests. That's okay. It's just important that we know that. Now, while you can get a pretty close, if 300 is what you've got, then you can mess around with the muzzle velocity there. It's not going to be as accurate or as complete as muzzle velocity data gathered from farther out. Now, you can see in our example of 750, maybe it's our ballistic solver originally tells us that we need to hold over 3.6 mils. Again, I'm just coming up with these numbers. These aren't representative of any actual load data. Please refer to manufacturer's guidance when coming up with your starting muzzle velocities. 3.6, but what we observe is a drop of 7.5 mils. Well, that's that bullet is traveling significantly slower out there. So what we need to do is we need to go back into our ballistic solver and we need to play with the muzzle velocity until this curve right here, this top curve, actually comes down and matches the curve that we are seeing. Again, the farther out you're able to put that curve in there, the better off you'll be. And the way you do that is by dropping your muzzle velocity. Now, 2500, 2400, those are if you're shooting a 308 Winchester and full power and normal median power loads, those are pretty slow going. Out of a 16-inch barrel, you should reasonably assume you get about 25 to 2550-ish. But again, start with your ammunition manufacturers. One of the key components here, again, is accurate distance. That is probably the most important overarching point of truing this ballistic curve. 300 meters versus 301 meters, that's not really going to matter too much. But if you think it's 300 meters and it actually ends up being 360 meters, well then that could cause a miss when you start looking at 750, 1000 and beyond. That's how I use the muzzle velocity in my ballistic solver to the muzzle velocity from what I experience, what the bullet tells me from the effects of the bullet that I observe. That's how I true that curve using the ballistic solver. Thanks.